Everyone. I am going to take on another question that was asked by Kanda Arunachalam, uh, and I'll read it out first. It says, how do I integrate the meditation techniques in my normal life? How do I apply the 30 to 60-minute cushion experience in normal activities such as during watching a movie or a podcast and other errands? I realize that watching my breath tries to bring me mindful. However, since the instruction is very simple, most of the times I forget that I need to watch my breath. Do you have any practical tips? So that's a great question of how does one integrate meditation experience into life? And I'll answer it in a couple of ways that might actually be contradictory, but here goes. So the first is to think about the the analogy between going to the gym and taking the stairs. So if two ways to get fit. One doesn't have to go to the gym to get fit. One can just lead a life that includes a lot of exercise and a lot of activity, and thereby naturally getting us fit. That would be like the taking the stairs approach. The other approach is going to the gym uh, or doing explicit activities for that effect. And meditation is similar. Um, However, the analogy breaks down a little bit in our current lives just because so much of what is considered normal for the rest of our lives actually is not just neutral, but it sort of undoes a lot of the effects that or the muscles that meditation is trying to train. So it's almost like antithetical to that. Um, so so that's the first piece is thinking about the cushion practice as a gym practice and then life practice as can you incorporate things like taking the stairs? So, and maybe Kanda's question was, what does that look like? So there's some things that you can do. One is um, just before starting something, before you engage in an activity, just taking a moment to like really let go of what you just did, uh, to fully arrive in what you're about to start. And that can be a sort of an applied practice. Another is just taking moments to pause. Similarly, not just between activities, but like when you get overheated, when you have strong emotions, taking a moment to pause before reacting. But this sounds so trite. It sounds so easy and obvious to say, oh, yeah, one should pause before reacting. If only one could remember to do that, right? And so I think we run into a little bit of a challenge here of uh, figuring out what's the cause and what's the effect. So, for example, if I don't know if this resonates with people, but there's this old Monty Python movie called The Life of Brian, and in that, there's this guy that everyone thinks is a messiah, and he's like, "I'm not the messiah, I'm not the messiah," and he's trying to run away from these crowds. And as he's running away, he drops one of his sandals, and everyone stops and says, "Oh, the Messiah took off their right sandal." So they all take off their right sandal and and say like, "Yes, we should be like the Messiah." And now they're running with one sandal. And so I always think of that because I think sometimes when we talk about mindfulness, we get confused between what is the cause and how does that cause ripple out as effects in our lives. So, for example, when people say take a moment to pause, uh, sometimes I think there definitely is value in deliberately trying to do that at different times. However, uh, like I said, if only one could remember to do that. Well, how does one remember to do that? The way one remembers to do that is when you have started to build a practice of continuously coming back to your breath, continuously uh, noticing your physiology without getting caught up in the thoughts, the emotions, the stories in your head. When you build a practice of doing that for an hour, 2 hours each day, half an hour, 10 minutes, it doesn't really matter. But when you build up that practice, now as you're living life, that practice sort of comes back to you and it becomes something that you can deploy. Uh, and so it doesn't become so much something that you're deliberately doing, but that you have available to you in those moments. So let me give another analogy or something. Suppose sometimes when I teach, I'll say, okay, imagine that a bunch of aliens came to Earth and they said, hey, tell us what this fitness thing is that you guys are so excited about what is fitness? What does it look like? And you say, well, why don't you go to the gym and go look over there? Uh, and so they go look over there and they come back. They're like, yes, I know what fitness is. It's about being smelly. It's about grunting, and it's about sweating. And of course, you laugh and you say that's not what fitness is. But the mistake they've made is that they've made the mistake of looking at what it looks like when it's trained versus what it looks like once the training is complete. Similarly, with meditation or mindfulness, what it looks like when you're training mindfulness might look like silence, it might look like stillness. It often can look like being alone when you're doing these practices, but that's not what it has to look like as a potential or as a skill that you've built up. Similarly, if you say, "Hey, what does it look like? Can you be can you be a fit driver?" And you're like, "Sure, you can be a fit person who drives, but does that mean that you drive to get fit? Probably not. Can you be a fit eater? Yeah, of course, you can be a fit person who eats. Um, but would you treat eating as the activity that makes you fit? Probably not. But is it true that someone who's really fit will tend to eat differently than someone who's not fit? Probably. Uh, Probably partly because of just what feels good to them, probably partly because of their preferences, probably partly because they see the effect of their food on their fitness. But those activities aren't necessarily the thing that train fitness. So similarly with meditation or mindfulness, a lot of people say, well, I like to listen to music and that's my mindful activity, or I like to walk and that's when I'm mindful. And it's like, great, you can be mindful and do all of those activities. In fact, just like with fitness, there's nothing that is outside of the realms of activities that you do when you are mindful, because it's a way of relating to all of your experience. But instead of thinking of it as a thing that you do, think about it instead as a latent potential. And when you do certain activities like meditation, what you're doing is you're building up your capacity or your latent potential, so that as you go through life, that latent potential is available to you at all times to then deploy in moments when it's necessary or when it's useful. Just like with fitness, you don't, do this arbitrary action of pushing yourself up off the ground because you think you're going to need that necessarily, but you're building up a capacity so that now when you are going about your day and you need to lift something or you need to push some object, you have that capacity built up and you can deploy it. Similarly with mindfulness, when you build up this capacity or this potential, then in your life, as you're going through the ups and downs of your day and of your year or whatever, you can deploy that ability very quickly and very at the appropriate time. So in a way, and I said I was going to give a couple of conflicting opinions on this. So I'm saying a couple of different things. In this, I'm saying, hey, there is no particular thing that you need to worry about. If you build up this potential, then that potential will be available to you and it will also influence how you act. So I think that's definitely true. I think it's also definitely true that you can look at people uh, who have spent the time doing these activities, and you can look a little bit at, like, okay, how do they behave? What are things that they do that helps them cope with the ups and downs of life? So for example, the things I mentioned: taking a breath, pausing before reacting, uh, taking some time without any inputs to recharge. However, this may not be the practical, like, 2-minute thing that you want to hear of, like, oh, this is the thing I can do to incorporate it into my daily life and I'll be done. But I really do feel that when you start to build a practice in your a habit of doing this gym work, that you will naturally see opportunities throughout your day where these things apply, and how they apply are will be very specific to the context that you live in. And that's why I think a lot of these practices, like the basic meditation practices, I think of as axiomatic. I think of them as axiomatic because once you have those practices, from there you can derive many other things. You can derive things like behavior, like what is the right way to incorporate this learning or this wisdom into my life. And again, because everyone's context is different, and maybe like if I'm a programmer, which I am, uh, the structure of my day and how I apply meditative practices will be very different from if I'm doing physical labor or if I'm a politician or whatever. I'm just giving work examples because I think that's easy for us to relate to. But I think each of our contexts will dictate how we apply those. But the foundational or axiomatic practices are really, I think, come out of or flow from the gym practice or the individual sitting on the meditation cushion and doing the work. Um, Sharda, I see you just had a comment. If you have a question, please feel free to uh, mention it in the chat. So okay, so let me double check the question here that we started with, uh, and just make sure I've covered those. Okay, how do I apply this during normal errands? Um, and then I realize that watching my breath is so simple that I forget that I need to watch it. So, uh, yeah, there was something I wanted to say about that. So, again, when you build a habit or a practice uh, of bringing your attention back to something, and it doesn't have to be the breath. Remember, I think there are some benefits of the breath, but in some sense, what we're doing in that practice is just building the habit of keeping our attention and bringing it back to something of our choosing rather than something that sort of the most recent shiny object. So as you build up that habit, it becomes something that you naturally deploy. And so I find myself, if I'm waiting for something to happen, like I'm waiting in line or I'm waiting at a stoplight or I'm, you know, even if I'm watching TV and an ad comes on and I'm waiting for the TV show to start or whatever, that in those moments, oftentimes, without saying to myself, "Oh, now is a good time to meditate," I just naturally notice the breath. And when I notice the breath, a couple of things happen. So one is that I notice a physical sensation in my body, and just the act of doing that creates a little bit of separation then between the thoughts or the stories or the narratives in my head and me. So that's useful many times. The second thing is that the breath uh, is a very coarse representation of our physiology. And so, for example, if I'm nervous, if I'm scared, if I'm angry, whatever those emotions are, there's some effect on our breath. And so, noticing that is again an immediate way to notice at a coarse level what the emotions are in my body. And then, um, okay, so I covered, yeah. And then finally, maybe the piece that feels a little more where the question came from is like, what about deliberately doing an attention to the breath? Uh, and so finally, I would say that again, naturally, when I notice the breath without without sort of deliberately trying to do that, then of course there are a few moments where I'm just returning to the breath and kind of getting in that practice while I'm waiting. Um, so uh, coming back to coming back to something I said, I'm just reiterating this again. Um, we can we can have an intention to incorporate some of our learnings throughout our day, but my belief is that rather than me or anyone else uh, trying to what's the word I'm looking for, prescribe particular ways of bringing these practices into your day. I think if you start to build a habitual practice on the cushion where you're sitting down and meditating in a dedicated way, then you yourself will naturally find opportunities to bring that into your day in a way that works for you. And I think that will be much more powerful than someone prescribing like, oh, one should take a breath before they brush their teeth or take a breath before they eat their food or whatever else. I think those are can be useful, but again, I think it's much more powerful when it comes out of your own personal experience and you find ways to incorporate it. Sharda, I see a question about what's Anapana, and I think rather than cover it in this video, I've got a video that talks about Anapana specifically, and maybe you can watch that. And if there's a follow-up question, I'm happy to jump in and do a video on specific questions you might have about that. So this has gone on for 15 minutes. I would like to keep these short so that they can be consumed. So let me end here, and I'll keep trying to answer questions uh, as they come up. So thank you again.